Hello, and welcome to my presentation. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land I currently present my work to you, the Yorta Yorta and Bangarang people, and invite you to acknowledge the custodians of the land on which you reside currently. I would further like to acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging, and recognize that land has never been ceded, and this was and always will be Aboriginal land. Today, I am presenting my findings for my class impact project for Unit EDLL 604, Evidence-Based Teaching, Assignment 3. This will be the concluding assessment of the unit, summarizing the essential aspects of the impact project that has been designed and implemented over the past few months. My impact project is titled Review into the Influence of Modeling, Explicit Instruction, and Student Agency on the Rate of Task Completion in Low Socio-Educational Schools, and will be a significant barrier and I have faced in the classroom and attempts I have made to rectify those barriers. The general process is I will begin by reviewing the context of the township surrounding the school, including socioeconomic data and geographical information. I will follow with a discussion of literature I have reviewed that has informed my impact project and strategies to solve barriers. Furthermore, I will discuss aspects of data, methods, and research that I've utilized to monitor student progress throughout the duration of the project. Finally, I will elaborate on the findings from the data, isolating significant successes and challenges. This will culminate in a summary of implications for the future and considerations for future research if this subject or intervention were to be reapproached or redone. To give you a snapshot of the township context, Cobram is located in the far northeast region of Victoria, sharing a border with New South Wales along the Murray River. It is home to approximately 6,465 people as of 2021, and its most predominant age bracket is between 70 to 74 years old, which constitutes 509 or 7.9% of the population. Regarding levels of education, residents reporting to have a bachelor's degree or higher account for 459 people, which is 6.5%, and Year 12 finishers is 708, which is 13%. Sadly, this is reflected with 749 reportedly only completing Year 10, which is 13.8%, and a further 849 for Year 9s or below. Cobham's primary occupations are labourers, which accounts for 556 or 21.1%, managers, 383 or 15%, and technicians/trade workers, which accounts for 337 or 13.2%. Ultimately, a household in Cobham earns an average of $54,964 annually, which is 36,504 less than the Victorian average. This highlights the overwhelming issues regarding social disadvantage in the area, indicating a trend of socioeconomic disadvantage, and it should be considered that this is really important that we get it right for our students in this context. However, this does not stop at the employment and financial for households. In the school and educational context, it is a stark story as well. Cobham is a regional town located 60 kilometres from its nearest universities in Shepparton, Wagga Wagga, and Albury, Wodonga. Finley, Numurkah, and Yarrawonga are the nearest government schools. However, these are significant distances for working families to travel for alternative schools. Despite this issue, we have enrolled 414 students as of 2023, with 2024 seeing another 100 students enrolled in Year 7 and another 100 expected in 2025. With an average of 30 to 40 graduating Year 12s and irregular school leavers, Cobham Secondary College is a school is inflating in student population. Cobham Secondary College shows an index of community socio-educational advantage level of 956, and the distribution of socio-educational advantage level is distributed poorly. By 49% of students in the bottom quartile, and a total of 84% of the overall in the bottom half. This paints a very stark picture for our students. The Australian Bureau of Statistics has placed Cobram as level 2 for experiencing levels of disadvantage, 1 being the worst. Furthermore, the Australian Council of Educational Research has identified Cobram as ranked 603rd out of 666 regions in Victoria for equity in education. Our results have demonstrated a consistency with NAPLAN data with surrounding schools. However, when compared to the Australian average, our results are starkly deficient. My research question is, how can the combination of modelling, explicit instruction, and student agency impact the rate of student task completion in low SES schools? Task work completion signifies the attitude that students have towards education and the pride they have in their schoolwork. Incomplete work can identify student apathy, a sense of meaningless in education, and reluctance towards progressing education. My desired result is to ensure that students are not only completing work, but taking steps to ensure their work is completed to a sufficient standard in order to combat apathy and disinterest in the education system. My preliminary review of the literature had me looking for opportunities to maximize student attention and cognitive capability. The science behind the developing mind encouraged me to revise how I give instruction and improve the quality of my delivery. Cognitive load theory suggests that a human's cognitive ability can be broken into long-term memory and working memory. When something exists in your long-term memory, it has been properly embedded in your brain, having time and the opportunity to consolidate this as what we form knowledge. Working memory is the function of conscious thinking, whereby information about the environment is trying to be absorbed into the long term. For example, before we learn 2 plus 2 equals 4, we must practice and consciously exercise arithmetics before consolidating this as knowledge. Cognitive load theory establishes that in order to optimize learning and conscious thinking, extraneous details and procedures must be reduced and simplified respectively in order to optimize student thinking and student learning. Therefore, I inquired of instructional methods that reduced ambiguity and confusion surrounding a student's understanding of a task and began studying explicit instruction and modeling. Using a worked example for a task allows students to glimpse forward to see what is expected of them as they are completing their procedure. It also allows the instructor to pick apart the example, highlighting the functionality of each aspect so that students can understand better not just what they are doing, but how it fits into the scheme of the task. However, somewhere throughout the middle of the implementation, I found that students were producing work that was formulaic and not demonstrative of understanding. In order to correct this, I required to look into approaches that both clearly outline expectations while also allowing students room to express their independent learning. Exploring student agency meant that I would empower students with scaffolds and tools that allowed them to assess themselves and their peers. This would ensure that I was not the only one defining answers, but also enabling students to understand the task as a process, inspiring them to think critically rather than passively about their success criteria. Yeah, sorry. So I missed putting text into this. I'm a little bit rushed. I have adopted a pragmatist approach to this project, believing that a synthesis between qualitative and quantitative data will give me the greatest insight to the process of the project. Essentially, I would like to approach this in a very systematic way, but a purely observational data set that I originally set out to produce was not sufficient because I was unable to properly address student progress or detail how they were progressing step by step. It seemed a little bit too loose goose, and I wasn't able to actually process how they were improving and what skills I needed to address or readdress before assessment. The methodology, to just clarify some of the quantitative and qualitative data that I would be using, I've utilized a combination of quantitative data and measures to ensure a measurable point of comparing success. Though the first half of the project was mostly reliant of work samples and observations, diagnostic data such as NAPLAN and PAT testing was used to identify benchmarks for students. And when I say the first half of the project, I mean what was leading into the mid-project reflection. Additionally, past assessment and attendance data was used to inform previous academic levels as well as school absenteeism. Work samples were reviewed using point system to determine successful or unsuccessful completion, and checklists were used in the second half for students' self-assessment. A success continuum was the primary charter of this plan. In relation to qualitative data, students were observed in class for their behavior, understanding, and task satisfaction regularly throughout classes. They were also given impromptu opportunities to share their experience during mini conferences, especially in relation to the final assessment. And in the second half of implementation, uses of rubrics and self-assessment routines were utilized so that students could better understand their expectations, thus understanding the task more effectively. Now onto class context. Sorry if this screen looks a little bit busy, but I've selected a Year 7 English class. This student class has 25 students enrolled, and with two chronic absent students. A further three students are regularly absent, with a further 10 students who often miss classes due to other commitments, such as the school band or leadership duties. Furthermore, another three students miss classes often due to high abilities programs for gifted young learners. Based on the previous semester of assessments, which has been provided, there was generally nothing to be concerned about. Results generally fell between 50 to 60% average, with a handful of students slipping below 30 and more than that making it past 75%. Although this could be better, it is worth noting a general tendency to pass the assessments. However, my concern was not based on their assessment tasks, but when I looked into their workbooks and I saw their general everyday tasks. So once I took a week's worth of data and I analyzed and I created it into a chart, I was able to see a few more alarming trends in data. Upon analyzing their workbooks, this sample here on the screen is a week's worth of work. I observed a tendency for students to not follow instructions to completion or complete set activities in the lesson. This encouraged me to define two aspects of their learning process, first as work habits and the other as academic achievement. The table provides the steps of procedures, starting with writing the learning intention in your book and the way to the review questions. This is in the top section here, learning intention, border, date, do now. So I've just broken up all the small activities that I consider important work habits. I determine these steps as work habits and are foundational to address potential apathy towards instruction. The overwhelming amount of red, which signified incompletion, demonstrates that students are often avoiding steps of the procedure and indicates the potential for them not to not be fully engaged with the activity. Only 3 students out of 25 completed all steps, and 9 completed only 2 or fewer. However, this is not as concerning as the following data. Oh, sorry, I'll just move that as well. So you see the towers are quite hodgepodge. Anyway, sorry, next slide. So our next data is when reviewing the quality of their work, isolating this into their do nows, their main activities, and their review activities. As you can see up the top here, queue of do now, such and such. Quality of work was significantly lower than what I had anticipated. A bad result could come from a misunderstanding, incomplete work, disorganization, or missing the activity entirely. Quality of work for the main activity resulted in a 2.12 out of 5 rating, with only 4 students achieving a rating of 4 or higher. The quality of the review averaged 1.52 out of 5, and only 3 achieved a score of 4. Students were having an issue with following the procedures as well as ensuring the quality of their work as being up to standard, apparently. Therefore, I devised this project plan into 2 phases with distinct intentions each. Phase 1 is made up of 4 weeks and relates to a film studies unit where students watch and analyze a film so that they can write paragraphs in response to questions about character development. The main intention of this phase is to consolidate good work habits and routines, maintaining standards of organization and work attempts. Students will be provided work samples and examples of quality work so they can work towards common and acceptable ideas of success. The desired result would include completing lesson procedures, attempting all tasks, and taking responsibility for their own actions and following through with their work. The second phase, as you can see on our right, will be running for 3 weeks and will be an entire single unit, which will involve speech writing and performing. The first phase, if effective, will ensure students are performing tasks expected of them. However, it was noticeable that students produced similar work to each other, and the assessment was written formulaically by an overwhelming amount of students. In order to change this, a series of checklists, review cycles, and routines were implemented so that students would not only be exposed to work samples and models, but also given the agency to mark and assess their peers using the unit's rubric. This would enhance the meaningfulness of marking and assessment and encourage students to think more broadly about how to gain marks outside of following instructions. If successful, task completion will be maintained or even improved. Students would gain a better understanding of the marking procedure and encourage involvement in general tasks, thus improving agency and self-motivation. I've established this table on the right. Um, this is how I've chosen to review my first phase of activities. Breaking it down into 12 lessons of the first phase, I determined to mark students based on whether all procedures were followed in the lesson rather than staggered marks or halves. By all procedures, I mean the do nows, putting up the border, writing the dates, everything that was in the previous slide. Students received 1 mark for total completed attempts and 0 if any parts were missing. Although some data is hampered by prolonged absenteeism from select amount of students and does not illuminate how many students did almost every task in a lesson, for example, anyone who's done 6 out of 7 of the expectations, obviously that data is missing, but this is exactly how crucial it is important to follow every step. The overall success rate jumped from 44% in lesson 1 to 72% in lesson 12. 11 out of the potential 21 students, discounting the 4 absenteeisms, achieved a success rate of 75% or above, while only 2 fell below the 50% success rate. And if we look at the overwhelming amount of green, we see so much more green over here, whereas we do see spots a lot more red over on this side. However, phase 1 was largely successful, but was limited in its scope of achievement. Students that attempted or completed a do now may have displayed misunderstandings and therefore carried those over into the rest of the lesson. Students may have just been writing what their friends wrote without understanding the expectation. Furthermore, the tendency for red spaces to still reach the latter lessons in lessons 10, 11, and 12 suggests that as far as habits go, there is no necessary proof that these are established habits, just that there was a higher tendency for students to follow through with their work. And what we do have, however, are students that are familiar with the expectations of opting into tasks. Moving on to our second phase, phase 2 requires more explicit connections to the content. making more meaningful links between the work samples and the marking guide. We initiated the unit with myself presenting to the students my example of a speech that I would consider passable. Each student received the rubric for the unit, was given sufficient time with it, and even a word search activity to discover, to be exposed to the expectations, and was to rate my performance using said rubric. I then marked myself and would compare the two sets of data to see how students felt of my performance and how close their expectations matched mine. Let the provided graph demonstrate that besides some discrepancies due to absenteeism and also challenges of understanding, and some students were kind of taking it a little bit not so seriously, including here and this one here. Students were generally aligned with my own marking. My own mark sat at 72 and was comparatively close to this class average of 61%. This demonstrates a strong preliminary understanding of the marking expectations of the assessment. But this was only one of the things that I said. I also incorporated the use of checklists as a way of making sure students were accountable and enabling students to monitor their own work. This was seen as a supplementary but also an additional strategy. These would be used in the opening of classes as the success criteria and used as a review system at the end of classes to ensure understanding of the lesson. Marks were awarded out of 5 based on review completion, which would attribute 2 marks, and quality of answers, which would attribute 3. An obstructing factor was high absenteeism, which was caused by clashes with extracurricular commitments, including band and leadership duties. So the absence of green boxes can be partially explained by this. And when I say this, I mean in the right box here. Sorry, I just missed myself. Student averages were at 2.9 a 2.9 out of 5 rating at lesson 1, potentially indicating that the checklists were used and attempted, but quality of answers were not altogether successful. Lesson 7 was where it peaked above a 4-star rating, suggesting there was a general spike in the quality of responses before slightly dropping to 3.9 rating in lesson 9, our concluding unit. That could be indicated just here and here. 8 students averaged at a 4 or above out of 5 rating, and only 2 students fell at or below 2 out of 5 rating. This demonstrates that data has not been heavily skewed by a select few students, but was a general representative of the class's success. Additionally, this demonstrates a sustained and prolonged improvement as we see an increase in dark green here. We see the occurrence of 5s everywhere. This, for me, suggests that the quality of student work has improved and the review cycles are working. But once again, yes, high absenteeism did generally impact the work. If I was going to, another additional thing was a continuation of the reviewing assessment, much like what I did with the previous peer review on me. However, instead, this one, I required the students to mark their peers' work alongside my markings so that students could prove their understanding of the task expectations. This was also an interesting test to see how aligned my judgments were with the students and if there were any obvious outliers or any issues in student understanding. This would not necessarily contribute to a misunderstanding, however, but would illuminate any deviation from how I have instructed the class so far. The results between my marking and the peer marking were actually extremely close. My own average being at 65%, whereas peer assessment sat at 69%. This represents an approximate plus 4% deviation, with the largest degree of difference being plus 25% and plus 23%. Students were allowed to select the peer that marked them, and this can explain these instances of vast differences, suggesting that these students may not have been taking it as seriously as had hoped. But this is not necessarily the case. Students were more often aligned with my judgments, with a few exceptions that required some explanation. One student commented that their peer did an excellent job with their research, and so it made up for other elements of their presentation. Another student attributed extra marks for their quality of their peer's PowerPoint presentation, and another admitted to their peer not varying their vocal projection, however, felt that their tone was consistent and formal considering the content of their speech. The content of their speech was based on an idol. However, this idol was uh, quite a solemn character, and therefore a formal tone was probably more considerate and appropriate. Although there is a general deviation from my marks and the peer review marks, what struck me was that students were making comments and justifying their marks using the provided comment section, as well as using the same language as the rubric provided. When I found a discrepancy, especially any one of the ones that were 20% plus over, I did not receive justified commentary or a sufficient explanation for why there was a difference. However, when peer marks were above or below 10% or less, students had made sensible comments to justify their differences, indicating a shift from passive mark receiver to an active thinker that interpreted and made judgments based on the task expectations. The strengths and limitations would probably be varied, but I'll start with the strengths. Um, I like to think that there were numerous successes to the initiative that achieved a general increase in task completion, which in effect was the original basic focus for this implementation. There was an increase in work organization and procedural work habits that I was quite impressed with. The overall participation in all elements of the lesson trended towards an increase in task participation, suggesting a positive correlation between routine and work habits. Students, when held accountable for their progress, responded positively to increased expectations and the review systems. Overall, quality of work and understanding improved in the second stage of the implementation. Students responded positively and even embraced the peer review system, and the checklists appeared to have a net positive impact on student accountability. However, there did occur weaknesses in the approach. Students' studies were not prolonged enough to establish sustained changes in habits or to suggest any prolonged impact. The improvements to work habits is a baseline expectation for most mainstream classes. So, whilst we saw awesome positive work and student engagement, the real question is, does this study make any meaningful impact on this class? Whilst data collection was consistent and based per lesson, which meant that data was collected regularly, consistently, and in a methodical way, I worry that the improvement was not absolutely connected to the initiative entirely and could be explained by a combination of other factors, including other classroom habits or even just temperature in the classroom or environmental, perhaps on reflection, more research could have been done to practice a systematic intervention that has already been tested and successful. Modeling is an effective teaching strategy. However, perhaps it would have been better if I used a specific intervention tool that has been tested and successful and proven in the field to sort of continue the work into socio-economic disadvantaged communities or schools. An improved methodology of data collection is required to create a more stringent relationship between intervention and results, such as a tailored survey, formative assessments, or pre and post testing checks. I feel like I did let myself down with not thinking thoroughly enough about methodology. and approaches to the action plan. So this that would be on me as the tester. A further thing was that absenteeism and the high disruptions caused by extracurricular activities did relatively impact a lot of my data collection. However, I did still see many forms of improvement. However, absenteeism was still a quite disruptive factor in that. In regards to further implications, in consideration for whether I would take this up again, this intervention demonstrated the importance of routine and the use of modeling to ensure students are aware of behavioral and academic expectations in the classroom. Furthermore, it highlights the benefits of including students in the marking process, engaging their critical thinking skills in a way to encourage active processes rather than passive ones. For future implications, I would not worry about the different phases and sustain a whole period with both methods to ensure effective work habit and academic achievement strategies are cohesive for a sustained period of time, as much as possible, as long as possible. Furthermore, I would design units so that they followed the rubric step by step, demonstrating to students the connections between their lessons and their assessment and how it all relates. This would potentially combat student apathy towards tasks in everyday lessons compared to assessments. A more systematic peer review system that enabled regular assessment of peers would also benefit students and their feeling of significance in the classroom. The use of modeling would be a continuous cycle and therefore would encourage collaborative efforts between teachers and staff members to ensure the best and most effective examples are used to illustrate the skills required in the classroom. Also, a more effective and visually appealing formatting for data that is not Microsoft Excel would possibly be more effective if done in future or on a larger scale. This would require just a more effective collaboration of data collection. But thank you very much for listening. I believe that I have addressed um, ways to improve task completion for low SES schools. However, I do believe that reviews can be made to improve the overall impact of such things, including perhaps more of an early emphasis on task quality rather than task quantity or just task completion. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. I will send through the transcript as well. And yeah, thank you very much for your time.